Hello, everyone! Welcome back to the Chaotic Wholesome Podcast. I am, not podcast, talk show, same thing. I'm Kay, I'm your usual host. This is my co host David, who's very blurry and is about to be back. There we go.
Hi.
So, as always, this is the talk show where we talk about, TTRPG stuff, usually with some hot takes, and also with, we try to be a little bit thoughtful and a little bit deeper than just here's a tip on how to do a thing. So, as most of you know, if you've paid any attention to the news out of America, if you're not in America, I can't blame you for not knowing. It's been kind of a spicy day. So we're maybe going
Yes.
to be a little spicy today. Or maybe it's going to be super chill because I've spent all my energy. I don't know. We're going to find out.
We are
Um,
going to find out.
but I am Kay. You can find me at KDamnFear. It's down there. I am here every Tuesday with David doing the show. You can find me um gosh, what else do I even do? I just blanked. I should go to my profile because I have a stream schedule on my Twitter profile.
Yes.
I just finished up Tales from the Tavern where I got to reunite with my awesome Dead Planet crew, and that was great. I'm going to be doing an Emerald Templars playtest over on Creators Assemble on the 14th. And then on May 20th, I'm going to be over on D'Angelo, that's that underscore D'Angelo's channel, to do another, I think we're playing Emerald Templars for Homies Helping Homies. So that's my plan for this month. But starting in June, you can find me on another Outer Space game. And there may be something else coming up here real soon that I'll be able to talk about. But that's me. David, do you have anything to promote?
You can find me at Full Rubber Ducky on Twitter. And any business inquiries, it's fullrubberducky at Gmail. But partially thanks to Todd and partially thanks to Rich at what's his Twitter handle?
That'll DM.
That old DM. Um, you could find me doing a whole bunch of homework. I won a free copy of Monster Hunters Club during Todd Moonbounce's last Steam, so thank you very much, Todd. And I/K and I are working on a lot of things that will be debuting beginning in midsummer. So stay tuned for updates.
David will soon have updates. Very soon. Um, so yes, this is the stream. Thank you for hanging out and spending your Tuesday night with us, especially a Tuesday night as charged as this. Jareth apparently has opinions today. So, as you saw in chat, there is a sad cat yelling in the background. We'll see how much of it y'all pick up. So
Right.
David, today we wanted to talk, and this will not be the final, but we wanted to start approaching the topic of evil characters, of your bad guys and gals.
Um, of your bad guys, gals, and pals. So it's funny because, for one, we always take suggestions from viewers, and today's topic is actually specifically from a conversation I had with a viewer who recommended it. And they also recommended a few more, so we will see more of those in the future. Um, but the timing was sort of perfect because over the weekend, before the bad news came last night, there was a kerfuffle and a bit of a
Kerfuffle.
discussion about um, the origins of races and the totality of races in the Twitter D&D community. Specifically about how there was an argument about how an entire race could be and should be evil. And that is something that both Kay and I very much disagree with.
We have strong opinions on that.
And obviously, there are coding issues with that because, for better or worse, the 70s were a different time, and you could code you could be more stereotypical in your coding without causing much trouble. But then that was also when that space was far less welcoming to people who looked like me or Kay, and why is my camera doing this?
Just to make you
Just
angry. Just to make you angry. Well, also, before, and we're going to dive deep into that because that is absolutely good and worth talking about. But it's also worth pointing out that the moment you take the liberties and the courage to say an entire race, fantasy or not, can or should be evil, you are teaching everyone who follows that an entire race can or should be evil, regardless of the characteristics you attach to them. As soon as you say everything of this are evil, people are going to start drawing parallels and making connections with people that they know in real life, because that is just, humans are coded. Our brains connect things. We see patterns even when there aren't patterns. So even if you're like, I made up this thing, it is completely fake, it is in no way inspired by real life, someone is going to find real life in that. So teaching people, hard coding racism, well, not great.
and also
Might be a bold statement, but
there are many things about this that chap my hide, but part of what chaps my hide about this is that it's lazy storytelling. Like, you could there are countless fantasy and sci-fi races and species that are coded one way or another that specifically address um, a social issue that we have. Like, Star Trek is famous for broaching a lot of social issues, from the Vietnam War to, you know um, what is it to mean to be non-binary, um, what does it mean to be asexual, uh, and many, 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 many. Um, right, we live in real life, therefore we
mm-hmm.
cannot divorce real life from fiction. Um, and a big problem I have with coding races, um, according to real life stereotypes, is that it's lazy, inefficient, sloppy storytelling. You get so much more out of your storytelling, um, if you, instead of having orcs, was the example used later, instead of having all orcs be evil, having different clans of orcs that have different viewpoints. Like, and the opposite side of it is also particularly galling, to say that all humans are good or all elves are good, which is objectively not true. Um, and even going back to the granddaddy of this discussion, Lord of the Rings, you know, despite the high esteem that the elves were held in by Tolkien himself, they were still assholes.
Oh yeah, they were. Oh
Um,
yeah, they were.
and so you miss out on a lot that's interesting and a lot that makes up a culture and a society by just saying, well, all of you fit into this box, the end. Um, and I feel like Star Trek, of all things, did a really good job retconning that, because you I know most people have not seen Enterprise. I watched every episode of Enterprise. And at one point they say, listen, Klingons, yes, are a warrior race, but we aren't always like that. And it was not, you know, always centered on war. Like, there's a reason that we have faster than light propulsion. There's a reason we have advanced medical techniques. We have this deep, rich history of science and music and art and culture. And I love the throwaway, um, line from Next Generation of, "Oh, you think that Shakespeare fellow is great? You should read him in the original Klingon."
Yep.
Um, and so like the Klingons, as an example, become much more interesting and much more fascinating when you learn that their courting rituals involves reciting poetry. When you learn
Klingon
that,
operas.
right, Klingon opera is a thing, that even the most like um, hardened warriors stop and smell the roses, understand the importance of um, speaking well and the art for and all of the arts, um, and even the various parts of their brutalistic culture also have an art form to it. Like there's a reason it's called the martial arts, is because it's more than just killing people. Um, and so lumping all orcs or all elves or all blank into it's lazy, and it's a huge missed opportunity. And if in your home game you want to do that disservice to your players, I am not in a position to stop you. But when you come to my table, you're going to get more than cheap stereotypes and lazy workarounds and shabby shortcuts.
And at least to me, there's little more fun than looking at a stereotype and how do I turn it on its head, and how did this stereotype come to be? Um how how can I take this and be like, okay, yes, this is a warrior tribe, but like these are people that would be seen as savage, but once you've spent time with them, oh no, actually there's a culture here. There's something really interesting. There's stuff we can learn. Like there why does another culture feel this way? Are they protecting themselves? You know, it's kind of like Wakanda in the Marvel movies, right? Everyone left them alone because they thought they were, this uncultured, just I don't want to say anything because I'm going through and I'm like, what's
Yep.
a non-offensive way to say this? And my brain is reaching for words that I absolutely do not want to use
Yep.
because I'm tired. But you know how the whole world saw them. And then they were like, actually, we're the greatest technological force on this planet. And oh my goodness, that was fun. And I want to play in a Marvel game in like America or Britain after that revelation happened. Like I want to play a secret agent or like someone in one of the superhero clubs there where they're starting to figure out and like how do we adjust to this? That would be fascinating. Steve says that one test in DS9 where Worf blindfolds his son and they spar, and the whole point of the exercise is to realize that when a fight isn't fair, refuse to play by unfair rules.
Um, and Worf is a good, and his son Alexander are good examples of a cultural anthropology concept of an
Mm-hmm.
insider. And it is someone who is on the outskirts of a particular culture for one reason or another, who can provide a window into the nuances of that culture for outsiders. And so Worf has a stranger in a strange land uh, story arc where he has to make peace with um, his origins and then the world that he lives in. And he has to be told by his peers, look, you don't have to compromise who you are to be with us. Um, and what's great is you see in Deep Space Nine that he has this renewed, centered self.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and his choice to commit to the Federation when finally offered that totalitarian acceptance from the Klingon whole world, um, is partly because of his the acceptance of him as a beacon of Klingon culture outside of Kronos. Um, and if you make all of the Klingons evil, then you miss out on that entire story arc. If you make all of the Romulans evil, then you miss out on the nuance and the understanding and the importance of bridging gaps between cultures. Um, and you know, there are many things you could say about Gene Roddenberry, good and bad, but the idea of broaching, um, not looking at other cultures as inferior, and instead looking at other cultures as, oh, wait, we have plenty to learn from this. And if there are still lessons that that community or that culture needs to learn, um, not saying it's our job to teach them
Mm-hmm.
the right way of things, but rather to step back and say, okay, you guys are going to figure this out, and we will be back when you figure this out.
And Vivian brought it up, so I'm a left. Like Garrick and Bashir. If if every if I'm blanking on the Kardashian. If all the Kardashians, one of them's a family.
Cardassians.
Both are evil. Let's be fair. If all the Cardassians were 100% all evil, we would miss that entire arc, and then like. And I mean, I'm not saying that's the only good thing about Deep Space Nine, but it's definitely the best thing about Deep Space Nine. Fight me.
Listen, Garrick in Deep Space Nine was my absolute favorite character. Full stop.
Mm-hmm.
But even in 1966 Star Trek, they approached all of this with nuance, and bring it back to the TTRPG space. Regardless of how those races were written in the past, we now have new rules to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Fifth edition is informed by previous editions, sure. Um, and other TTRPGs are informed by Dungeons and Dragons. Great. But a lot of those prejudices have been left behind. And you can honor the the history of a system without adhering to the basic elements of it. Like, there's a reason we have amendments to the Constitution, because at
That's
some point they
real
went,
for today.
listen, we gotta add a couple more things here because there's some things we didn't cover, and it's true now. And if there are things in current fifth edition or in other TTRPGs where we go, no, objectively this is offensive, objectively this is wrong, then it is our duty as DMs, as players, as people in this space to leave those things behind.
And it doesn't even have to be like 100% objectively. I don't have to look at something and say like I need to go reach out to someone with lived experience because before I decide if this is bad or not. If you are reading something and you think, maybe this isn't quite right, change it. And honestly, when you start putting, especially if you have interesting character backgrounds, we talked about this a little bit when I was on Tales from the Tavern. If your characters have put together something, if your players have interesting character stories, and there's a way you can take this race, that's traditionally evil, or this race that is traditionally like just a little bit, there's definitely a racist thing back there somewhere, and I don't know how much it's still coming through, but I'm not entirely comfortable with it. Work in it, find a way to work in your characters' backstories, right? Maybe it's not all of them. Maybe one of the characters I'm playing in, who's not necessarily a bad guy, but like I put together this whole story about how it's not that the organization that trained them was evil, but it wasn't good for them. It didn't work for them. And I wanted to say this character turned around and created, found their own way through this system. And then kind of reading that, it's like, well, that's very much like the white character learning martial arts and being the master, right? I didn't want that thread. And so I said to my DM, I said straight up, I want there to be another clan, another group of people who do this exact thing. But my character doesn't know this, and they were such a prick to everyone in charge that no one told them. They didn't reinvent a wheel. They just tapped into a thing that's already known, and they think they're really special for it. And I don't want that to potentially be a plot point that they are a chosen thing. Find ways to do that with your characters, with your settings. Find ways to change things around and make it unique and refreshing for your players.
I mean, and Curse of Strahd is a good example. Curse of Strahd is packed to the gills with racist terms, and that doesn't mean Curse of Strahd is bad. Um, all of the old school TTRG people I've talked to have fond memories of running Curse of Strahd, and it's why they keep bringing it back in each editions. But maybe don't use the racial slurs that they put in the book. Uh, just an idea. Um, and then conversely, like, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, but race doesn't necessarily have to be a big deal, and gender doesn't necessarily have to be a big deal. We have, like, Kay and I both worked on systems where we went, hey, we don't like how gender is portrayed in this. um, Kay has run a module where she specifically changed the gender of characters in the module just because she's like, well, I don't see enough women here, so I'm gonna put a woman in here. And great. That's 100% all of the reason that you need in order to do it. And it doesn't mean that you're serving an agenda or anything like if not that they are publicly available, but anybody who's read um, a lot of my fiction sees that there are a lot of women prominently focused on. And the reason that isn't because I'm trying to make some big feminist statement. It's that as cishet trash, like, I like women, and so in my head and in my fiction and in the things that I make, I want to spend time with women, and so I put women in it. Now, does that mean that I have to tap dance around a lot of problematic things that authors like He Who Shall Not Be Named, whose TV show immediately dropped out of the cultural zeitgeist, may have done? Yes. Do I have to be mindful of those? Do I have to be responsible about them? Absolutely. But Kay and I also have embraced this responsibility. Like, in Godplane, we're talking about all the different characters in Godplane. We're talking about what we want to do. And Kay says to me, "Listen, Storm is really cool. What if we put a Storm-like character in the? But how, like, culturally sensitive is it for me to put a black person in?" I'm like, "Go for it." And we did go for it. And guess what? Like, at the beginning of episode one, and I think one or two times over the course of the 10 episode run of Godplane, what was her name? Not Aurora.
Fasol?
Vasal. Yeah, Vasal. Vasal was black and was referenced as black over the course of, but it never became a thing.
Right.
Like, it's just her skin tone happened to be this, and her cultural identity wasn't tied to her skin tone. And you can have races and genders and people in your games where their whole identity is not wrapped up into these social barriers. Um, and so when I say it doesn't necessarily have to be a big deal, we had a black character, we've had women in our campaigns, and at no point did anybody stop and go, hey, they're making a statement about race. They're making a statement about feminism. Like, and, you hear certain parties toss around ideas about color blindness, and I always, like, roll my eyes. But eventually, we're not there yet, but eventually we want to be in a position where, you know, black people could show up into Bridgerton and it's not a cause
Revolutionary.
for panic.
Yeah.
Um, and that Asians and Western Asians and Eastern Asians and people from all walks of life can participate, especially in science fiction and fantasy, where specifically the rules that we are constrained in real life are taken away, where all of us can participate equally without it being a bad thing, without it being controversial.
So, we've talked a lot about like what not to do and why not to do it. What is your favorite kind of bad guy, David, to either come up against or to write about / play?
Mm,
Because like you gotta have a good reason for your party to hate the bad guy, or else that game's not gonna be terribly fun.
um, so this brings me to a very interesting point because not all villains are created equal.
Hmm.
You have outright villains, and then you have antagonists, um, and then you have people who sort of ride the line between. And there is so recently there's been a wave of sympathetic villains
Hmm.
where you go, oh, they had a bad childhood, they had this happen, this was taken away from them, and therefore they're out to get everybody else. And so you go, okay, this person is the bad guy, but their outrage is justified.
Hmm.
Um, and that's where you have your save the cat, kick the dog moment, where your hero could be the biggest brooding asshole on the planet, but if you give them a save the cat moment to show the audience, hey, not a complete piece of shit, and then you give the antagonist, no matter how reasonable and like smart and insightful and justified they are, you got to give them a kick the dog moment where they go, oh, by the way, this person is just a giant asshole.
Yeah.
Um,
Like Magneto was right is an incredibly popular shirt for a reason. He wasn't
that's because
wrong.
Magneto was right.
He wasn't wrong. He just maybe wasn't going about it the right way. I love those villains because you're like
Right.
it triggers that little bit of obsessive like it triggers like the I can save them, right? If we just, if Loki just gets a hug, maybe, and then they do the bad thing anyway and you're like, "Okay, well, I guess." And then you're kind of like, "Oh, but maybe now I got to spark up." Nope. Okay. Still a bag of dicks. Okay.
I love the villains where I go, poisoning the town's water supply is bad, but he does have a point.
Mm.
Um, and then you have antagonists where they're goal oriented and your protagonist happen to be in the way. And one of my favorite examples of that is the villain out of the first two seasons of Farscape.
Mm.
This guy did not care even the tiniest bit about any of the characters on the show until they got in his way. And he only cared about them enough to push them out of the way to continue doing what he was doing. Um, and you have and I feel like so to answer your question of my favorite type of villain is my favorite type of villain is where the hero is the thorn in the side
Mm.
of someone who was very goal oriented. They're like, listen, I'm going to take over this kingdom. I'm going to flood this entire
Poke,
valley full of
poke,
people.
poke, 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 poke.
Right. But also I so knowing that these sorts of villains are out there and that people have made a concerted effort to build sympathetic villains, either by giving them a tragic backstory or by giving them a really good point to represent. especially in TTRPGs where you are delivering the hero fantasy, you can't have a pinnacle of heroism without a pinnacle of villainy. And I do have a special satisfaction whenever I run into a Captain Planet villain. And I
Yeah.
specify a Captain Planet villain because they're evil for no reason.
Or the Fern
Like,
Gully villain.
right. You will run into a villain in Captain Planet where they open up a valve of toxic sludge to dump it into the river, and you're like, why are you doing that? And they're like, to poison everyone. And it's like, but why? It's like, because I
You
want to.
you have such advanced technology and medicine. You could cure cancer. I don't want to cure cancer. I want to turn everyone into dinosaurs. Like,
Right.
okay,
and
well,
and you're like, well, what benefit it's like, no, it costs me money to dump this sludge into the river. Like, it actively makes my life worse to like, there is something so precious about that level of like Snively Whiplash mustache turning villain.
there's and I want to say real quick, there's both space for and a need for both of those villains. If every villain is sympathetic, that makes a very moral quandary. And you might even, in the case of Critical Role, I won't say which season, the character who was potentially going to be the big bad of the entire thing ended up being on the side of the main characters. They reformed this character. And if that's all it is, you're going to have a really hard time fighting. But if every bad guy is just blindly, then you're going to get a bunch of murder hobos. So, for me, and David
Yes, tell us
David
yours.
laughs. Now, to be fair, like Godplane, that was a pretty simple villain.
Yeah.
But those aren't my favorite. I like the villains that are like, I don't want to say like a god, because you can punch a god, right? I'm not My favorite villains to build, especially for campaigns or like epic books, epic storytelling, are the villains that are either like a force of nature or a corporation. Because that puts so much pressure on the party. Because, okay, sure, this is a corporation that's killing the planet. You kill the head of that corporation, his kid takes over. You kill the kid, the board of directors takes over. They all do the same thing. Nothing changes. If there is something that is evil but a force of nature, like it's not capable of being reasoned with, it's just a force of destruction. I love those because it makes your players, no matter if they're level 20, makes your players feel small because they can't solve it by punching it. They can't solve it by murder. They can't murder their hobo their way out of it. They have to sit back and think about, who am I in this world? What am I doing? Why am I defending this? And how can I stop something that, without spoiling too terribly much, because this was much earlier in the season, in season 2 of Critical Role, Caleb's mentor became like, Caleb's one of his big character arcs was he needed to confront and either make peace with or join or kill his old mentor. And when Liam, the player, wrote the character, he thought it was going to be like a small town school teacher with no real power. And then he learned just how connected this character was. And it became one of those, I can get a momentary revenge, I can kill this person, but they're going to send everyone after me then. And he's trained people to replace him if this happens. And the feeling of helplessness this gave a very powerful character was so... it makes me happy. Chat has been flying while I've been talking, and I need to catch up. What am I supposed to be doing? A fun solo stream? I don't know what I'm supposed to be solo streaming about.
No, I typed in chat. Never ask me about Doctor Doom because that's like a 2 hour rant that no one has the patience for. Because I have strong
Yes.
opinions about Doctor Doom and about Reed Richards and I'm not gonna get started on that. I'm not.
You know,
Um,
there is a week coming up where I am not going to be able to stream, and I might just hand you stream keys, sir.
yeah. I mean, if you're trying to get your whole channel banned in 1 week, can do. Um,
Maybe I'll set it up
but
on Ko-fi. Get you paid for it.
what? So since we're talking about villains, who's your favorite villain, like across all media? Which I
Ooh.
know is a big thing.
Hmm. Let me think. Well, do you have an answer to that while I think? And Manhattan is loud.
Yes. One is Scorpius from Farscape, and two is no. One is Doctor Doom, and two is Scorpius from Farscape. Um, and I'd also argue that the Borg from Star Trek are also one of my favorite villains. Uh, the Jem'Hadar, like if I had to pick one from Star Trek, it would be the Jem'Hadar. But now I'm getting deep into my Star Trek nerddom, and we don't have time for that.
So, I'm not sure they're villains as much as they are anti-heroes, but they're definitely villains for at least not in the subsequent material. The Turks from Final Fantasy VII.
Right.
Like
Right.
they're in that sympathetic, like I love like the attitude that they give, how we know just enough about them to be able to make up a bunch of our own stuff. Because that's a way to make a really good bad guy, is like just give little bits. Don't give him everything. Just little bits, just enough. I like to say, oh, I shouldn't say this on stream, but I'm going to. Hope if any of you steal it, credit me. Um, Fandom grows in the space between canon. Fandom and that obsession and all of that stuff happens when you leave space for people to imagine. Be it your players, be it your party, be it the people watching, right? That's how. And this is probably not going to surprise you at all, David. But my other favorite villain, like actual true bad guy, and I'm not going to say who it
Professor
is in
Xavier.
case people haven't read it. Yes, that too. Um, well, actually, Hojo from Final Fantasy VII is also just a wonderful, irredeemable villain that I just love him so much. But the bad guy from the Mistborn trilogy, the original.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if you haven't read Brandon Sanderson's work,
Please do.
um, sit down and read the Mistborn trilogy. Full stop. The end.
Yes.
Some of the finest fantasy ever written. The end.
And a female character written by a male writer that does not make me want to yeet myself off a balcony.
Right. Though one of my favorite moments in Final Fantasy VII with the Turks is, I haven't played the entirety of the remake, but in the original, at one point you come across the Turks sitting and having like tea or coffee or something, and everybody in the party is just ready to scrap, and they're like, "What are you doing?" And they're like, "You're here. You're evil. We're gonna fight you." And they're like, "I'm not on the clock. Why
Yep.
go do what
Mm-hmm.
you're doing.
Yep.
I
We're
will
on
see you
vacation.
when I am contracted to do this."
We're on vacation.
Um, and
And
yeah, just and I was just like, that is again, if there was ever a book of henching, there would be an entire chapter dedicated to the Turks.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And my boy.
Hmm.
Um, I'm also gonna pull out one more, and it's a super deep cut, and it's not necessarily because they're the best villain, but because they're a villain that brings me nothing but joy. Mojo Jojo.
Oh yeah,
I'm
Mojo
surprised you didn't go
Jojo's
with a
top
coup.
notch. Ooh.
I'm waiting for it. I'm waiting for it. Waiting
No,
for
I'm
it.
not gonna do the whole
Not
thing
gonna
on
do it.
stream. No,
He will.
but
He will just randomly call me, and then just do the entire Samurai Jack opening and be like, "So what's up?" And I'm like,
long ago and I distantly. No, I love. So again, Aku falls into the like Planet villainy of like, why am I evil? Because I'm evil and I'm great at it. And oh my god, just there's so much tongue-in-cheek, cartoonish, slapstick humor from Aku on top of real like gut-wrenching villainy that Aku is one of the best written villains ever, full stop the end. Yeah, no, no, Aku makes me fucking
okay.
feel my things.
And if we're going, and I'm gonna I don't remember their names, but if we're going with the I am evil because I'm evil and I'm great at it, the old men from the Muppets.
Oh, you
Theater
mean my
box.
spirit animals?
Yes. Those two.
I mean, I hope to one day grow up to be precisely like them.
They were Marley and
Just give me a
Marley.
perch
Yeah,
and some shenanigans happening below.
Marley and Marley in the Muppet Christmas Carol. Do you know they are legit a couple? Because
I
one of them is married and talks about his wife occasionally, and you're like, okay. And then one day the wife shows up, and it's the other one in drag. Look it up. It's real.
That is fantastic. That is top notch.
So that's the other thing. Like, so here, okay, if you make a villain that's very crafty and very sly, player's gonna simp for him. So just be ready for that. Be ready for the thirst. If I don't care if they're a guy, a gal, or somewhere in between, if they have confidence and a plan and are even halfway attractive, or wear a mask, or have a whip or a cane, people are gonna simp for them. So just be ready for that. It's normal. It's a part of growing up. But
Right.
don't be afraid
Because
to have villain. Like, one of the best ways to hide a bad guy, one of the best ways to fool your party that this cannot be the villain, is to make them seem just a little bit incompetent. And if you watch Sherlock BBC, I'm not going to say anything more. If you watch Sherlock BBC, you know, and it's so good.
um oh, I just completely lost the train of thought that I had. Oh, yeah, like there's a whole contingent of people who are trying to bottom for Riddler right now.
Yes. And
And
so many Loki girls
well, to be fair,
and
Loki is a
boys.
service top, but um, and he is the brattiest brat in the history of
Yeah,
brats.
service top to some, bratty bottom to others. It totally depends your energy.
And people will your villain could be the opposite of sexy, and people will still find them sexy. Like I always say, you could tell how old um someone is by what phase they discovered Tim Curry.
Yes.
Because I know multiple people who discovered their sexuality from Tim Curry as the sludge in Ferngoing. And
And
it's like,
others as
really?
Tim Curry as the bad guy in the Barbie movie.
Right.
Also, Sauce
Right.
swooping in here with the sick burns. A little bit incompetent, you say. So the writers of Sherlock's last season were the villains all along.
Yeah. Yeah.
I watched that final episode in a theater. I paid for tickets. I went to a theater.
Pain.
I have regrets still.
Yep. But whole series was worth it to me. One, for the awkward sexual tension between Sherlock and Watson, and also because Irene Adler won everything, and that's oof,
Irene Adler
oof.
is usually written so badly in Sherlock stuff. We will at some point I need you and Alicia to just talk about Irene Adler, and it's going to be a great
Mm,
conversation. I'm real excited.
mm.
Um,
But uh, but yeah, so that all leads us to what makes a good villain. And I've spent the week thinking about this because this topic was suggested to us before the last show that we had. And it comes down to two things. One, your villain has to be a threat. If it's not a threat to your heroes or to what's important to your heroes, then it's not a villain. And two, you got to have a quality kick the dog moment. And so, whether your villain has a terrible background and feels justified in what they're doing, whether they are goal oriented and are convenienced by your heroes, or if they're just like a cartoonish villain, they need to be a threat and they need to demonstrate that they are unequivocally a villain.
a good villain, especially in TTRPGs, will also stay flexible. Not only because, and now I'm getting fuzzy. Why are you infecting me with this, David? There we go. Not only will your party chuckle fuck their way into ruining your villain's plans multiple times. But again, the best villains, if they can find a way, you can find a way to connect your villain to the characters in a way that they don't expect. If you watched Godplane, I'm very proud of, and I don't know, I felt like I dropped a lot of hints. I don't know how obvious, if any of you watched Godplane, I don't know how obvious it was from how early on that there was a tie between one of the characters and the villain. And sometimes a little subtle. And in TTRPGs especially, you can't be subtle, right? It's like if you watch The Good Place, like here were the 4 signs that you were, oh, that's great. I dropped 3,643, but I'm glad
Right.
you picked up on those 4. Like you gotta do
Right.
that. Chucklefuck should have been the name of the campaign 3 party. All I'm saying. But like, you need to have a good idea of what motivates your bad guy. You gotta know what their goal is. But if you can leave some details a little bit loosey-goosey, when did they do their first crime, right? When did they first make an impact? Did they cross paths? Who did they screw over early on? And if you can find ways to start weaving that into the backstory that your characters do, or your players will often just hand you stuff. And if you have a loose enough framework to connect it, it's wonderful. Because it's like, oh, wow, there was this cave-in, this natural disaster happened. Do you think this was orchestrated by this person we're chasing? No, but yes now. Hold on.
Right.
Like, because they'll tell you. It's like when you run a horror campaign, make people describe things to you. When we in Godplane, when they started taking stress, and it was like you're gonna have something either physical or mental happen, a tick, something that's gonna happen. How does your stress manifest? You tell me, because I don't like it when games tell me, oh yeah, you're stressed, so therefore you're now reacted, like you have a stomach ache. That's lame.
Yep.
I would rather start having racing thoughts, and then I can act out like, oh my god, okay, and give your players room for them. They don't necessarily have to know that they're informing this, but like, hey, what happened early on in your character's history that like, did they get swindled? And if they give you any kind of idea that you can tie in, and the bad guy either orchestrated that or was the person who did that to them, and that was their first hit of the. Ooh, it's so much more personal and so much more fun.
Speaking of effects, in the future we're going to do a episode on itemization, um, and Kay make a special note about the water from Godplay.
Oh, that was fun.
Yeah. But I'll be the first to acknowledge that it is difficult to make a memorable villain. There are all sorts of villains that have been thrown at heroes across all media that are utterly forgettable. Um, like I tell people all the time, name me 5 Aquaman villains not named Black Manta. Name me 5 Wonder Woman villains. Name me 5 Superman villains not named Lex Luthor. Um, and your average person is going to have some difficulty pulling even half that many. Um, and that's because realistically, it's hard to make a villain that stays with you, especially after you've won. And in TTRPGs, especially like longer campaigns, it is even more difficult because you have to spend so much time hiding that villain and then leading your players to that villain. And so there are many, many people who've played long campaigns where the first time they met the actual villain is when they had the final showdown with them. And then while the villain was in the middle of monologuing, i.e., the DM was finally explaining how brilliant they were, they just magic missile fireball, you know, the barbarian's axe goes burr, and so on until said villain is dead. And so it's really hard to build an antagonist that endures outside of your session. But um, there are a lot of ways that you can help get there. Like you said, utilize what your players give you to build into your because if one of your players is like, I'm an orphan from a small town or from a small village and the village got burned down by a warlord, well, guess who's the warlord now?
Yep.
um
Or
and
even kind of like we did with Godplane, right? Even if it's not exactly what happened with them, we had a character who was really obsessed with books and reading and knowledge. So what happens when they meet a foil? When they meet a character who is also very intelligent and obsessed with all of these same things, but has spun around to the other side. They're looking through a dark mirror, and that sticks with people.
um and listen, Ming Na Wen as Chun Li and Raul Julia in unfortunately his last role, but possibly his greatest role. That and Adam's Family. But
Mm.
who we there was some spice, there were sparks on screen. Like, how could a movie be that bad and have actors and performances that good? Like, for me, it was a Tuesday. Like, decades later, we're still referencing that. There are people
Mm-hmm.
who have referenced that to me who do not know where it's from,
No idea where it's
have
from.
not seen Street Fighter. I'm like, you are missing out on a treat. A French dancer and acrobat plays an American GI. Like, just chef's kiss. So good. Anyway, um and I'm glad you bring up the concept of Dark Mirror, because one of the ways in which you can build a better villain, make a villain more memorable, is to decide what kind of villain do you want. Do you want a cartoon villain? Do you want a flawed antagonist? Do you want um, someone who has a good point but is just going about it wrong? Or do you want a Moriarty to your Sherlock? Do you want someone where your characters look at them and go, okay, I could have, like, a couple of different decisions and this could have been me?
Yep.
And once you start to build out, once you figure out your starting point, then in a lot of instances, your villain almost built itself. All you got to do is just give your villain, like, one thing. Like, does he carry a whip? Does he have a snuff box? Like, and then you give him his thing, like you give him his cat to pet, and then you're off to the races.
And a lot of times, you know, you can find yourself in like, I don't know if this one or that one's going to work better. And you can test that out with your party. Throw some minor villains their way, a couple corrupt officials in whatever town or lordship they're in. See what they gravitate to. And then you could be like, oh, ho, ho, so that's what you like. Small tweak. Now my villain is everything you're going to remember. And also, reminder, if you only have if you have a big bad and that's it through the entire campaign's going to be real short. At the very least, you need a couple red herrings. People where they're like, that's the bad guy. And you're like, oh, but are they?
I've done that in my campaign. And I cannot tell you how many times my players have taken the bait, because they've taken the bait literally every time.
We're all looking for the
Um,
big bad. You feel
mhm.
real clever when you find him. And when you find out the big bad isn't the big bad, you're like, I just murdered someone.
That too. There have been a couple of suspect. Whether your campaign devolves into murder hoboism or not, and as my friend said to me, if your murder hobos kill someone who has a house and then move in, they are no longer murder hobos. Um, but even if your campaign does not devolve into murder hoboism, there there's always going to be one or two suspicious, like, should I really have killed that person? Was this a good idea? There's going to be some blood on the cobblestones, so to speak. So get ready to embrace that. Um, and we could do a whole episode on how to deal with murder hobos, um, whether you want to fight against it, whether you want to lean into it. My advice is lean into it. Um, but I love giving the players the tools to direct their own adventure. Because if you make sure that every action has consequence, whether positive or negative, um, then they can then choose what consequences they're going to embrace. And the only other thing that you have to do on top of that is to make sure that for all of their actions, there are always unintended consequences. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, but something they didn't see coming.
Like every time your paladin tries to do a nice thing and heal someone, they end up being in pain or mad at them.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But you know what?
Or
She keeps making that decision. She keeps making the right decision, even though it keeps biting her in her big green butt.
or you have players that killed somebody prominent, and the whole time they're waiting, oh man, I'm waiting for this to, like, blow back and bite me in the ass. And then they're walking by and they hear a town crier that says the murderers for that important person have been captured and executed.
I tried to
And
stop
that
it. I tried multiple times to stop it.
and that really changes how your characters and your players view the consequences of their actions.
If you
Um,
don't, one of my favorite things, David knows this, one of my favorite games, it was influential in my childhood. The remake made me cry multiple times. If you haven't played A Link to the Past, That was the first game where I went, wait, am I the bad guy? Do I have the right to do this? Should I be able to do this? And if I can give my players even a moment of that, like, oh no, am I not the hero? That's real fun.
I mean, I was on Team Genocide, so I didn't feel like a blip of. I was like, yeah, get him.
All right, David, we need to hit some final thoughts because Mama Damphy is coming to town, and I gotta go soon. So it's a short session tonight, y'all. Thank you for hanging out. I know this has been a little bit more like, but it's been a day. We feisty, and we are like, yes, I have to go. Do a last thought. I'll be right back.
Okay. Now you get to hear about Dr. Doom. No. So the final summary is don't, and we'll get into all the different reasons that falling into tropes and stereotypes, well, stereotypes because tropes are literally unavoidable. But falling into stereotypes are lazy. But to make a great villain, make them a threat, give them a kick the dog moment, give them agency, and then pick your archetype and build out from there. And always look to your players and look to their characters for inspiration and direction. Because again, we circle back to the idea of collaborative storytelling. So don't just let your players be collaborative, but actively search for elements within their characters and their characters' actions that help you build your storytelling as you go along.
And I'll also say, and outside of a very few of those archetypes we talked about, where they don't need it, really give your bad guy a personality. Because if they're just monologuing and then they're dead, they're not going to be memorable. What do they like? Are they messing? Are they sly? Are they clumsy? Are they deliberately clumsy? Like, what do they do that makes them stand out? What's their quirk? You know, if they're sympathetic, do they have a big old scar? So, okay, yes, they're evil, but are they always eating? Whenever is it two bad guys, a man and a woman? Whenever they show up in disguise, they're cross-dressed. So, it's Jesse and James, y'all. Team Rocket.
Yeah,
Team Rocket
yeah. I was about to say, I was like, I don't know how we had this whole villain discussion without bringing up Jesse.
Oh, it was in my brain. It was in my brain. I got.
Because Team Rocket.
My boy is always with me.
Because, yeah, Team Rocket, peak villainy. Because, again, there's some cartoon villainousness there.
And what's frustrating about Team Rocket, and then I swear, we're done. But, like, what's frustrating about Team Rocket is they're really, really good at a lot of things. Just not the exact thing that they're doing. James especially. James is so good at so many things. Anyhow, Carolyn from FF1, Strangers of Paradise. Yep. So, that is our chat for this week. Thank you for hanging out with us. I'm sorry it's shorter, but, sometimes real life. Next week's going to be a little bit shorter, too, but then we're back. Gonna be normal. Yep. Find us here every Tuesday. I've got a bunch more stuff. I'm not going to go through it all. KDampFear on Twitter. My streaming schedule's there. You can always find it. It's always pinned. If you have questions that we didn't address, hit us up. If you have suggestions for the topics, I have a Discord. Hop in our Discord. Tweet at us. We are excited to talk. We thank you for spending your Thursdays with us. Thank you for your questions and your comments. Chat was flying tonight. Holy cats, y'all are amazing. David, anything else?
Thank you very much. And thank you to Web Captioner and usually Bardley IO, but maybe not this week.
It's going this week. I remembered the thing. Thank you both. Thank you, David, for remembering. And I'm just going to throw out thank you to Bubbling Cauldron by Ridley's Tea Shop, because tonight, Kay is brought to you by this. Remember, y'all, it's been a really bad day. Take care of yourselves. Give yourself a break. Stop doom scrolling. Get some water.
Definitely get some water.
Figure it out one way or another. Thank you again. I'm going to find someone to rate us over, And thank you for spending your evening with us. We'll see you next week.